9mm+P versus 327 Federal Magnum, and what we have today is our Speer gold dot ammunition. Our 9mm+P is a 124 grain jacketed hollow point rated at 1220 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel, and our 327 Federal Magnum is a 100 grain jacketed hollow point rated at 1500 feet per second through a 4-inch V barrel. So I'm going to use my 5-inch barrel Smith & Wesson M&P 9 to test the 9mm+P, and my 4-inch barrel Ruger SP101 to test the 327 Federal Magnum. So looking at the energy numbers of these, the way they're rated, the 327 is a little bit more powerful. That being said, this being rated through a 4-inch barrel, we'll probably gain some velocity with this. So I think we'll be kind of close as in terms of energy with these. And that's kind of a fair comparison in my opinion. And a 5-inch semi-auto does not include the chamber in that measurement. So when you take away the cartridge length, you're talking 3.8, 3.9 inches of travel from that bullet nose to that muzzle. As where this, you have that full 4.2 inch barrel travel there. So very similar overall size. These weigh almost exactly the same weight too. So it gives me a really good idea on the feel of recoil between these two. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point or anything like that. Then I'll move on to doing more of a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle. After that, we're going to have a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in a real living target. So I'm really trying to simulate a 9.5 inch target there with ribs on the front and back. So we'll do a plain clear ballistics shot, our best potential shot, then a real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 9mm+P 124 grain rated at 1220 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel, about 5 yards from that target. Let's see how I get through my 5-inch barrel, see how much more we get than that 1220 feet per second rated velocity. 1290. 1257. 1253, 1258, 1260. So a little bit more than that rated velocity. So that's doing pretty good overall. Our 327 Federal, 100 grain rated at 1500 feet per second through a 4-inch V barrel, which is it's a factory test barrel that has a slit cut into it to represent a cylinder gap. So let's see what we get in my 4.2 inch Ruger here, see how close I get to that 1500 feet per second. $15.90, $15.64, $15.92, $15.60, $15.31. So that's smoking hot, and the recoil compared to the 357 Magnum, not even remotely close. I can't even compare this to something else other than maybe a 40 Smith & Wesson. Very little recoil, but a lot of power. So let's start ballistics gel block and see how these two compare. All right, first up we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot, our best potential to get hollow point expansion because there's no denim in the way to clog a hollow point. Our best potential to get penetration because there's no rib simulation in there. So let's see how our 9mm+P does. All right. Set that with our 327 Federal Magnum. We'll take a look. All right, those both did pretty well. The 327 did arc down, did not hit the 9mm bullet, but it did arc down quite a bit. And the first thing I did notice here, when we entered here, that 327 is quite a bit wider there of an impact than the 9mm. Energy dump though, 9mm on the bottom, 327 on top. Both are pretty good. And both are actually pretty good going into the main block here, but the 327 definitely has a little bit greater of an energy dump and tearing going on, has really jagged petals. Both of these honestly look like they did fantastic. Our 9mm, we got about 12¼ inches. Camera parallax will make this look like it's probably over 13 inches, but 12¼ inches from a front-on view there. So we just met our minimum, so it did pretty well. Now when we look at our 327 Federal Magnum, we're at about 13½ inches of penetration. So our 327 did just a little bit better here overall. Not bad. So let's put on our denim, put in our rib simulation, and see how these compare in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of denim followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiber board that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch medium density fiber board at the back to represent hitting back ribs. So let's see if we get here with our 9mm+P. All right, let me set that back up and we'll hit it with the 327 Federal Magnum. All right, 327 Federal Magnum, real world simulation. Let's see how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so that hits really hard. Our first 3 inches, our 9mm on the bottom, our 327 on top. Similar, but the 327 definitely has just a little bit more of energy dump going on there. And our rib simulation here, I hit the side here with our 9mm. I mean, it went straight through there, so we had enough impact to count that. And then our 327 on top. So a 327 had actually a higher percentage of its expansion going on because that hole is bigger than the 9mm hole, and the 9mm started out bigger. So that's pretty impressive overall. But both of these did really well. They went in a perfectly straight line once they went through that rib simulation. So both of these look quite good. Our 9mm, we went to 15, I'll give it 15¾ inches of penetration. Really good expansion overall. Our 327 Federal Magnum, just as good. We're at 13½ inches of penetration. So looking at this, they have a little bit different penetration numbers here and there. Our real world simulation definitely showed something quite a bit different than our plain gel shot. But this makes sense overall because a 124 grain expanded versus a 100 grain expanded. The more bullet weight will have a little bit more momentum, and that will push that bullet a little bit deeper than something that's a little bit lighter. But for what it is, that 100 grain is just enough weight on that 327 to get adequate penetration. So both of them look pretty much equal in my mind here. If I had to take an educated guess, I'd say the 327 might be a little more effective at stopping a threat just because it's dumping a little bit more energy. And a lot of people say, well, that's not a real thing. It might not be a real thing in terms of what literature is out there, but what it means in my testing is that you get a lot of expansion right away, oftentimes fragmentation, and rounds that do that, like 125 grain 357 Magnum semi-jacket, a hollow point, or a Federal 9mm PLE, those are the ones that in the real world situations where people talk about, officers talk about, they stop threats incredibly well. And I'm seeing a little bit more of that effect with the 327 versus the 9mm. But both of them did quite well, honestly. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them. And then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 9mm and our 327 Federal Magnum. So our 9mm had really big, fantastic expansion. Even better than what you typically see out of Gold Dot, because that 5-inch barrel really pushed that at some good velocities there. On our 327 Federal, this thing really expanded out, flattened down quite a bit. It's really, really big petals coming out there. Not bad overall. Now going through our real world simulation, things change up a little bit here. Our 9mm, his expansion wasn't nearly as good after going through that MDF. And we compare that to the one through the plain gel. You know, good amount of difference there going on. Now we look at our 327. Now this is pretty much textbook going through denim and rip simulation. Now it's not as big as through plain gel here, but it's a nice consistent expansion. So when we look at our real world simulation, our 9mm and our 327, you know, both of them did about as well as each other, but I like that early textbook perfect expansion we got with the 327 Federal. Looks really, really good to me. So, you know, both of those did quite well overall. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I just want to see what kind of, you know, accuracy and follow-up shots I can get, just how quick I can get these on target. And by the way, these guns weigh almost exactly the same. I believe the semi-auto weighs a couple ounces less, but it always has a little more capacity. It brings the weight almost exactly the same. So I'm just going to get a front sight picture, pop off some rounds with our 9mm. See how this does for me. 14 yards from the target. Alright, good enough. 327 Federal Magnum. Let's see what I can do with this thing. I did pull one. I don't know why I pulled one. The recoil is not that bad at all, but it's weird. It has a good amount of muzzle rise, but there's almost no felt recoil. So it's kind of like you're snapping a whip. It just feels kind of weird. So it takes a little bit of getting used to with something like this. I did replace the spring on this last night. Both the trigger return spring and the hammer spring to a 10-pound hammer spring and an 8-pound trigger return spring. I think that's part of the issue too, because this is the first day out with this like that. So the trigger press is just a little bit less than what I'm used to. And by the way, case ejection with this revolver is perfectly fine. So I got a few more rounds of these. Let me back it up and shoot from some distance and see how these things will do for me. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. So I just want to see how these things will do from a little more distance. So I'll shoot slow enough that I think I can hit these as many as possible. So 9mm+P. See what this does for me. All right, so those rounds are definitely a lot better than what I am, because the 2 times I missed, I felt something like I jerked those shots. So that was 100% on me. The ammo itself, like that first shot I made, that was right where I was aiming. So, you know, the windage and elevation is spot on at 75 yards with these. So those shot really good. So 327 Federal. I can do with this thing. All right. I was afraid that was going to happen with this new trigger spring. That's going to be that hammer spring. I mean, light primer strike, definitely going to be on account of that 10-pound spring I put in there. So I may have to switch this back up. It came with the 12-pound as well. So I'll probably have to switch that up. I'm gonna go single action to get a little bit more force on this hammer here. All right, I did pull one, but overall, I'm gonna say not bad performance overall with this. You know, I think I pulled it because, you know, I'm anticipating another light primer strike. You know, it doesn't take much at this distance for any little thing to throw you off. So any miss here is on me. So I'm gonna say both of these, out of these guns, are very, very accurate. The ammo itself is very, very accurate. It's just that for me, I'm pulling these shots a little bit. So Gold Dot is still pretty good ammo. You know, I kind of like HST a little bit better throughout the years, just because I like that really thick jacket. And when they do expand, they tend to expand bigger and stay bigger because there's actual petals that come out and they really do a lot of cutting in that gel. As where the Gold Dot, they're more of a plated bullet. They're not technically plated, but they're plated like, I don't know, 10 times as much as a normal plating. So they're kind of like a jacket, but they're not quite a jacket. So sometimes when you hit hard stuff, they want to act kind of weird. But that does make them perform better in the sense of you never get jacket separation. So, you know, both of these are really, really good in my opinion here with these 327 and our 9mm. I was kind of blown away with the velocity I'm getting with the 327 Federal Magnum, but it kind of makes sense that I'm above that. If we look at what a 4-inch V barrel is, I think that they don't include the chamber in that. I'm not sure though. I'm not an insider in the industry to know whether they do or not. But if I had to take a guess, I think they're just putting the 4-inch barrel, cutting a slot in it. So I think, you know, if you take away the cartridge length, you're only talking 2.5 inches of actual barrel, and that might make sense. But, you know, I'm not really 100% sure on that, how they do that. I might actually include more for the cylinder. I'm not really sure on that, but we did get more than rated, and that really surprised me, pleasantly surprised, because really good performance overall. I'm really like what I'm seeing. And this 327, it's much like the 357 SIG, and it just doesn't make any sense because we're well over 500 foot-pounds of energy, but this is kind of shooting like a 38+P in terms of actual recoil. So it's another one of those cheat codes in the firearms world. Fantastic cartridge overall out of this particular revolver. And then the 9mm, good choice. I didn't get as much velocity gain as what I wanted to see, you know, going up to a 5-inch barrel versus its 4-inch rated. But we definitely saw some more, so we had some more energy than typical, and a lot more energy than what 9mm typically has. You know, it's hard to get up to 400 foot-pounds with 9mm, even out of this 4-inch pistol, and we're well above that. So fantastic with both of these. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.